you feel that emptiness, that immense thirst that the experiences of this plane can never fully quench? Have you ever wondered if that inner voice, the one that whispers uncomfortable and profound truths, is the same one that experiences the pain, euphoria, and fear of earthly existence? Modern humanity, immersed in the whirlwind of superficiality and immediacy, has confused the most vital terms of its own existence, using soul and spirit as interchangeable synonyms, a linguistic error that has perpetuated a profound state of spiritual disorientation. But tonight, in this digital sanctuary, we will not only unveil the precise map of your higher self, but we will also give you the master key to finally discern where the traveler resides and where the unchanging spark dwells. Prepare yourself, for the revelations that are about to manifest come from forgotten texts, from the secret chambers of perennial wisdom, those that promise not only intellectual understanding, but an authentic and tangible vibrational transformation. This truth is not mere philosophical speculation. It is the foundational engineering of your inner reality, understanding the distinction between your soul, the emotional archive, the mutable personality forged in the crucible of experience, and your spirit, the eternal fragment of source. The perfection uncontaminated by human drama is the first indispensable step towards self-mastery and the alchemy of being. The great work, the true ascension, consists of consciously aligning these two poles. When the soul submits to the spirit's immaculate purpose, when emotional energy attunes to the divine frequency, your existence ceases to be a chain reaction and becomes a deliberate creation, a beacon of light in the darkness of oblivion. We will delve into the depths where destiny and eternity are gestated, revealing the hidden mechanisms that allow you to raise your frequency and access a higher state of consciousness. The veil separating the mundane from the sacred is thin, and at this moment, we will tear it. We have been conditioned to believe in a simple unity, but the truth is complex and beautifully structured. Throughout this initiatory transmission, we will explore how the greatest mystical traditions in history, from the Eleusinian mysteries to Vedanta, including the Hermetic teachings of Egypt, have codified this essential duality. We will discover that the soul is like the wave, dynamic, temporary, and dependent on the body of water, while the spirit is the ocean itself, vast, eternal, and silent, the infinite reservoir from which the wave, the soul, borrows for its manifestation. The knowledge we will share today not only answers the deepest questions about who you are, but also equips you with the practical tools, silence, gratitude, conscious intention, to catalyze sacred union, inner hierogamy, and thus trigger an exponential increase in your vibrational capacity. The path to enlightenment requires the courage to look beyond accepted illusions and the willingness to seek the original text of existence. I urge you to commit to this process of revelation right now. To fully open the channel of ancient wisdom and seal your intention in the collective ether, I ask three fundamental things of you. First, please like this transmission as an act of acknowledgement of the truth that is manifesting. Second, please be sure to subscribe to the channel so that essential knowledge continues to flow unrestricted to you. And finally, and this is your initial decree of intention, a personal command to the universe and to your own consciousness. Write in the comments right now, I seek the truth. The fundamental distinction, the soul and the spirit. Paragraph 1. The soul, the emotional traveler and karmic archive. In arcane terminology and profound metaphysics, the soul is designated as the psychic entity, the matrix of our individuality, and the seat of egoic consciousness. It is not the ego itself, but rather the field where the ego develops and operates. It is the portion of our identity that interacts directly with the density of matter and linear time. Therefore, it is intrinsically mutable. The soul is the vessel of all sensory experiences, the immense and complex archive where not only the memories of this incarnation are stored, but also the energetic residue and karmic imprints of all past lives, functioning as a psychic biocomputer that records emotional cause and effect. It is the essence that feels, that suffers the wounds of abandonment, that experiences fleeting joy and profound sorrow, serving as the vibrational bridge between the dense matter of the physical body and the pure, immaterial frequency of spirit. We can conceive of the soul, often called nefesh in certain Kabbalistic traditions, or jiva in Hinduism when bound to ignorance, avidya, as the polished or tarnished mirror that reflects the light of the spirit. If the mirror is soiled by unprocessed trauma and excessive identification with form, the light of truth is distorted into patterns of fear, desire, and illusion. It is, in essence, the unique personality that has been shaped by the choices made in manifestation. It is the self with a name and surname, the one that fears death because it perceives the dissolution of its temporal structure as the end of existence, without understanding its intrinsic connection to the eternal source. Its primary function is to evolve through experience, learn to transcend dualities, and ultimately refine its frequency until there is no longer any distinction between its vibration and that of its divine origin, thus completing the cycle of return to oneness. It is, by definition, the aspect of our being that is subject to the law of impermanence and constant change, the arena where the battle for liberation is fought. This instability is its driving force, for the need for stability propels it towards the search for its immutable source, the spirit, the eternal and unchanging spark. The spirit, on the other hand, is the pure, unalterable and timeless essence that temporarily inhabits the vehicle of form. It is what in the Hermetic tradition is known as the divine spark, a direct emanation of the Creator, the fragment of the Absolute that carries the complete memory of the Source. Unlike the soul, the spirit has no personality. It is not subject to the laws of karma or the influence of human emotions. It feels neither pain nor joy in the human sense, because it operates from a plane of consciousness that is absolute perfection and wholeness. Its nature is Satchitananda, existence, awareness and bliss. The spirit is the silent observer, the impassive witness that has agreed to descend into dense manifestation through the soul as an interface, solely to allow the evolutionary process. It is the reservoir of unconditional wisdom, the original master plan, the holographic template of your complete divine potential, which is never damaged or degraded, no matter how turbulent the soul's journey may be. In the body, the spirit often resides, symbolized in the etheric heart or the crown chakra, the point of direct connection to universal consciousness, the Atman, which is identical to Brahman. When we experience moments of absolute clarity, unconditional love, or a peace that surpasses all understanding, we are, in fact, resonating directly with the immaculate frequency of our spirit, momentarily transcending the noise and identification of the soul with worldly experience. The spirit does not need to learn. It simply is knowledge. Its task is not to evolve, but to remind the soul of its origin and guide it back to harmonic resonance. Its presence guarantees that, no matter how far the soul feels lost in the labyrinth of illusion, there is always an Ariadne's thread, an uncontaminated line of return, anchored in the eternal truth that we are, fundamentally, divinity manifested. This immutability is its radical power. It is the rock of essential identity amidst the storms of experience, the dynamics of incarnation, and the psychic battlefield. The relationship between the soul and the spirit is not one of competition, but of vital complementarity. However, in incarnation, this relationship becomes the battleground of consciousness. When the spirit, the high frequency, descends and clothes itself in the soul, the emotional and mental interface, to inhabit the physical body, a dynamic tension arises. The spirit attempts to impose the divine will, the higher plan which seeks expansion, compassion, and unity. The soul, for its part, being immersed in the duality of earth, is constantly bombarded by the body's survival energy, the basic instincts, and the ego's projections, which force it to operate from fear and fragmentation. The true spiritual crisis of the human being occurs when the soul identifies completely with its temporary vehicle and its sufferings, forgetting its origin and its spiritual guidance. This forgetting generates what we call karma and cyclical suffering. The soul, without the conscious guidance of its spirit, acts like a ship without a rudder, at the mercy of the emotional currents of the world. The awakening process is essentially reconnection. It is the soul turning toward the spirit, using conscious will and intention to purify its vehicles of manifestation, releasing karmic attachments and egoic identifications. Only through this conscious act of alignment can the pure energy of the spirit flow undistorted into manifested life, transforming the lead of suffering into the gold of wisdom. This interaction reveals that the soul is the catalyst, the spirit is the substance, and the purpose is perfect unification, dissolving the illusion of separation and allowing the full awareness of the divine self to manifest through human form. It is a process of alchemical distillation where worldly experience is transmuted into pure essence, the hidden tripartite structure, and the frequency vehicles. For initiates of the oldest mystery schools, the distinction between soul and spirit is crucial because it defines the hidden anatomy of the human being, often seen not as a duality but as a tripartite structure: body, soul, and spirit. This trinity corresponds to different vehicles or energy bodies that vibrate at different frequencies. The physical body is the densest vehicle of manifestation. The soul, the psychic vehicle or lower astral emotional mental body, is the mediator, the field of information and energy that extends beyond the physical body, where thoughts and feelings are processed. The spirit, however, manifests through the higher bodies, often the Buddhic body, pure intuition, or the Atmic body, divine will, being the level closest to the source. The mistake many seekers make is trying to contact the spirit directly from the physical body or from the mental soul without having cleansed the intervening psychic field. The contaminated soul acts as a coarse filter, preventing the luminosity of the spirit from being transmitted. Therefore, any genuine practice of vibrational elevation must first focus on the purification and refinement of the soul, healing emotional trauma, challenging limiting beliefs, and dissolving identification with the ego. By doing so, the soul becomes transparent, allowing the inherent wisdom and unconditional awareness of spirit to flood and guide it. It is like tuning a radio. The soul is the dial, and spirit is the radio station of the perfect frequency. When the dial is precisely tuned, the celestial music of spirit flows without static, revealing the greater purpose and connection to the all. The path is always through the middle, the soul, which must be transfigured from a prison into a temple, the purpose of fusion and the portal of high vibration. Understanding this distinction is not merely an exercise in spiritual taxonomy, it is the foundation for the great work, the process of spiritual alchemy that culminates in the conscious fusion of the soul with the spirit, known as the realization of the Christic or Buddhic self in form. Human existence becomes meaningful when the soul, weary of its journey through density and having learned the lessons of suffering and duality, makes the unwavering decision to align with its eternal counterpart. This fusion does not signify the annihilation of the soul, but its transfiguration, The soul is imbued with the immortality and wisdom of the spirit, while the spirit gains a perfectly calibrated vehicle to manifest its divine will on the physical plane. It is in this state of union that the vibration of the human being rises exponentially, transcending the limitations of the third and fourth dimensions. The person who achieves this union not only lives in the world, but operates from a place of unconditional love and unlimited creative power, for their intention is not clouded by egoic fear, but supported by the omnipotent force of the source. Life ceases to be a search for external happiness and becomes the manifestation of inherent bliss. But the fundamental question that must now be addressed is, if the soul and the spirit have been defined so precisely by the ancient masters, how exactly did foundational cultures define this duality? And what metaphors did they use to conceal its power? The answers lie in Greek myths, Egyptian chambers, and Vedic texts. Now, before we continue, close your eyes for a moment and ask yourself, how does this truth resonate within you? Do you recognize the difference between the voice that fears and the voice that knows? Allow this knowledge to settle deep within you, integrating the distinction. Take 3 deep breaths, and as you exhale, release identification with the time traveler, embracing the silent presence of the eternal spark. We are ready to explore the historical traces of this wisdom. The distinction between soul and spirit is the root of all profound cosmogony, the line separating the perishable from the perennial, and constitutes the first threshold for any serious initiate seeking inner mastery. The soul, which we call the traveler or the psyche in its broadest sense, is the individualized psychic layer, the compendium of memories, emotions, karmas, response patterns, and the evolving ego, a dynamic and intrinsically mutable vessel shaped exclusively by sensory interaction and earthly experience. It is Heraclitus's ever-flowing river, never the same, the matrix of personal identity that changes with every choice and every life cycle, the seat of the lesser or egoic will. It is sensitive to the illusions of form, susceptible to suffering and joy, and its nature is inherently temporal and transformative. It exists solely for the purpose of dense experience. In stark and undeniable contrast, the spirit, which we define as the eternal spark, is the unchanging portion of universal consciousness housed within this temporary vehicle. It is the uncreated essence, the light that casts no shadow, the Vedantic Atman that is identical to Brahman, the one without a second, free from the chains of causality and time. This spirit is the silent observer, the point of unmoving stillness at the center of the soul's storm, absolutely pure, devoid of fear, desire, or need for learning. The soul travels, suffers, and transforms. The spirit simply is eternal and unchanging. The foundational civilizations encoded this truth with metaphorical and surgical precision, concealing the key within their pantheons and sacred texts. In the mystery of ancient Egypt, this duality was masterfully represented by the Ba and the Ka. The Ka was the vital force, the ethereal double that infused energy into the physical body and approached the concept of sustaining energy, the immutable divine presence, spirit. The Ba, on the other hand, was the individual soul, the being with personality, the capacity for movement and transformation, that which journeyed through the duat and, being mutable, needed to be nourished and remembered through rituals. The mutable Bia, the essential Ka. In the vast architecture of Hinduism, it manifests as the Jiva Atman, the individual soul bound to samsara and karma, the empirical self that experiences the illusion of separation, and the Paramatman, the supreme spirit, the transcendent and unified consciousness, the spark. The Jiva Atman, like our soul, believes itself to be fragmented and suffers from illusion. The Paramatman, our essence, already knows that it is whole and universal. Plato's own philosophy, by stratifying the soul into rational, spirited, and appetitive, reflected the complex and earthbound nature of the soul, implicitly contrasting it with the immutability of pure form, or nous, the cosmic mind, which is the abode of the spirit. These historical analogies are not coincidences. They converge on the recognition that the soul is the transient operating system, while the spirit is the unconditional and eternal power that executes it. Now, let us confront the metaphysical heresy that disturbs contemporary notions of salvation and transcendence, the turning point that redefines the purpose of embodied existence, the soul as we experience it. This construct of experience, emotion, and ego is not destined for personal immortality in the much-valued sense of perpetual survival of the egoic identity. Its primary function is purely alchemical, of service, but not eternal. The soul is the crucible, the vast laboratory of manifestation. It exists rigorously to transmute dense experience, the lead of duality, into pure wisdom and elevated vibration, the gold of unified consciousness, an energetic treasure that is inescapably absorbed and assimilated by the spirit. The often avoided truth is that once the traveler has completed its cycle and delivered its harvest of distilled consciousness to the spirit, the spark, the individualized construct of the soul, can dissolve, reintegrating into the cosmic mind or source, but losing the specific and temporary egoic signature it works so hard to preserve. The tragedy and the source of most human suffering lies in the soul's visceral fear of this dissolution and its fierce struggle for the survival of its illusory identity, a struggle that is the root cause of all attachment, fear, and karma. The ultimate goal of incarnation is not to save the soul, the traveler, but to enable the traveler to fulfill its task of purification and transmutation, so that the eternal spark can shine unhindered by illusion, thereby releasing the false identification with the separate self that the soul has created. This dramatic and liberating distinction resonates deeply with the subtlest Eastern thought, such as that found in Taoism, which views existence as a constant and vital flow of dualities, yin and yang, eternally operating within the unchanging unity of the Tao. The soul, with its intrinsic mutability, its constant and exhausting oscillation between light and shadow, pleasure and pain, is the perfect manifestation of temporal and dualistic qi. That which changes is experienced and is subject to decay. It is the wave that rises and must then fall. The spirit, however, is the Tao itself, the unconditional source, the underlying law governing the flow, the radiant emptiness that contains all form and all experience without being affected by them. The Tao does not need to learn, does not age, does not suffer. It is simply the way of wholeness in perfect stillness. By aligning the soul, the temporal flow, the emotional and egoic traveler, with the spirit, the unchanging Tao, the spark of consciousness, one ceases the neurotic struggle against the current of life and becomes the current itself, achieving the state of action without action, Wu Wei, where effort becomes superfluous. This sacred alignment is true awakening. It is the radical recognition that the personality is a glorious and sensitive tool, a brush for painting life, but that true identity silently resides in the unchanging, observing consciousness, in the divine essence that has been temporarily lent to the soul for this incarnation of density. The fundamental distinction, therefore, transcends mere intellectual exercise and becomes the most accurate map to existential mastery. The soul, as the emotional traveler and seat of personality, is responsible for moral choice and karmic reaction. Its evolutionary imperative is to purify intention so that it can reflect, without distortion, the inherent perfection of the spirit that inhabits it. The spirit, as essence, is the guarantee of our eternal and unbreakable connection to Source, the immovable anchor in the volatile sea of form. Conflict and fragmentation cease the instant the soul abandons its struggle for egoic control and embraces its role as a polished mirror, understanding, and more importantly, living. This distinction is the sine qua non for ascension. But this knowledge, however powerful, only reveals the engine's blueprint. This inevitably forces us to address the crucial question of praxis. How do we achieve this transition, this perfect, painful, and transcendent subordination of the temporal, the soul, to the eternal, the spirit? The answer is a forced journey through the subterranean depths of the psyche, a process that esoteric alchemy calls the confrontation with the shadow, the only way to completely cleanse the mirror of the soul. Now, before we continue, close your eyes for a moment and ask yourself, does the idea that the traveler is temporary, even though the spark is eternal, resonate with you? How does this truth impact the way you manage your fears and attachments? Allow this knowledge, liberating and terrifying in equal measure, to settle deep within you, redefining your true struggle. Take 3 deep breaths, and as you exhale, visualize the dissolution of a particular egoic fear, embracing the silent presence of the eternal spark, which already knows it is indestructible. We are ready to explore the darkness necessary for the light. History not only confirms this duality, it elevates it to the foundation of both Western and Eastern epistemology. Plato, the great architect of Western metaphysics, already rigorously distinguished between the psyche, the seat of desire, emotion, and discursive reason, intrinsically linked to the body, and, therefore, to corruption, error, and the ebb and flow of time, and the nous, or pure mind, that uncontaminated intellectual spark capable of perceiving the eternal and immutable forms. The psyche was the entity responsible for memory, the consolidation of egoic identity through sensory experience, the vehicle of learning and the potential prison. Although the psyche was superior to the flesh and the sensible world, its mutable nature made it a constant target of illusions. It was the navigator who was meant to guide the vessel of life, but who was often seduced by the siren song of attachment and vanity. This Platonic model imposes a strict hierarchy. Salvation is not the healing of the soul itself, but its ascent and forced alignment with the imperishable truth of the nous. For Plato, philosophical discipline was nothing other than the slow and deliberate dematerialization of the soul, a conscious effort to free itself from the tyranny of opinion and fleeting emotion, so that the light of the spirit could, at last, pass through it without distortion. This vision laid the foundation for the understanding that the soul is the battlefield, not the prize. In the Indian subcontinent, the distinction becomes even more palpable through concepts that rigorously define the mechanism of reincarnation and liberation. The jiva is the individualized soul, the transient actor trapped in the wheel of samsara, conditioned by memory, karma, and the accumulation of vasanas, subtle impressions. It is the entity that suffers, that desires, that identifies with name and form. The Atman, on the other hand, is the universal spirit, the essence identical to Brahman, which remains immutable, untouched by birth or death, the eternal witness consciousness. The goal of the Upanishads and yoga is not to improve the jiva, but to transcend it, to merge it with the Atman through the destruction of ignorance, navidya, that produces the illusion of separation. Similarly, in ancient Egypt, duality manifested in the complex structure of being. The Ba was the mobile personality and the Ka was the life force. But the state of Ak represented glorified transcendence, the union of the Ba and the Ka that had attained the state of luminous spirit, liberated from corrupt matter and capable of dwelling alongside the gods. All these cosmogonies converge on a fundamental and irrefutable principle. The mutable and egoic part must be subordinated, cleansed, or ideally consumed by the immutable and eternal part in order to achieve conscious immortality. Even Taoism, ostensibly centered on the oneness of the Tao, recognizes the interplay between the Po, the lower or earthly soul, bound to the earth, sensations, and primal instincts, and the Han, the higher or celestial soul, bound to spirit and creative potential, emphasizing the need to cultivate refined qi to transcend materiality and align the self with the cosmic flow. But it is in Gnosticism, in particular, that we find the starkest warning regarding the nature of the unredeemed soul. The Gnostics understood that the soul is not merely a neutral vehicle, it is often a cosmic error, a fragment of divinity symbolized in the myth of Sophia that fell and became ensnared by the demiurge, the false creator of this material world, a being whose power lies in ignorance and limitation. And here lies the first great heresy, the turning point that should shake your understanding. Most spiritual traditions venerate the spirit as the source of truth and reject the egoic manipulation of the soul. However, what happens when the soul, in its desperate search for meaning and reaffirmation, becomes the spirit's worst enemy, using karmic experiences not as lessons for liberation, but as tools to justify its own emotional tyranny? History has sold us the idea of a heroic soul on its journey. I tell you that the soul is often the prisoner who has fallen in love with its own chains, and who fiercely resists liberation because it fears the dissolution of its individualized identity. This historical confusion, poorly understood and romanticized by modern New Age spirituality, is what has led to the narcissistic cult of the self and the obsessive pursuit of the soul's destiny, separate from the transcendent purpose of the spirit. When we seek to heal the soul, repair its emotional and karmic wounds, without completely and irrevocably subordinating it to the spirit, we are merely polishing the shackle and making the cell more comfortable. The soul, being the sum total of all our incarnations, reactions, and unresolved wounds, is an immense archive of unprocessed pain and unfulfilled desires, a set of reactive patterns. If we elevate it to the pinnacle of identity and intrinsic truth, we simply perpetuate the cycle of trauma under the illusion of healing or empowerment. Ancient traditions, from the Egyptian Ma'at, which demanded the weighing of the heart, the seat of the soul consciousness, against the feather of truth, to the yoga of Patanjali, which demands rigorous purification through the yamas and niyamas, required the discipline of character of the soul, precisely because they knew that the spirit can only manifest through a vessel that has been emptied of the impurities of temporary attachment, wounded memory, and reactive judgment. To blindly trust the guidance of the soul without prior surrender is an act of selfishness disguised as spirituality. It is like asking a map of a labyrinth to show you the way out of the universe, when the map itself is the illusion that must be discarded. In short, across continents and millennia, the message is consistently clear and monolithic. There is a part of us that is the living, reactive memory of form, the soul, the psyche, the jiva, and another that is the immutable silence, the eternal observer and the source of truth, the spirit, the nous, the Atman. Human conflict, existential neurosis, and the suffering inherent in incarnation are the direct consequence of the former's stubborn resistance to relinquishing its authority and false sense of control to the latter. Now that we have established the conceptual distinction and understood the cultural warning against the soul's autonomy, we must move immediately from the theoretical plane to the plane of esoteric action. The next question, the most urgent for the aspirant to conscious ascension, is the mechanics of the transformation. If the soul must be stripped of its authority so that the spirit may reign without interference, what are the internal rituals, the disciplines of psychic dismantling that allow us to perform this painful but inescapable transfer of power? We must descend into the alchemical forge of practice, where the fire of will consumes the illusion of the separate self. Moment of alchemy. Now, before we continue, close your eyes for a moment and ask yourself, how does this truth resonate within you? Do you feel resistance to the idea that your soul might be an obstacle rather than a guiding light? Are you willing to sacrifice the identity you have constructed so that the spirit you truly are can emerge? Allow the discomfort of this confrontation to become the necessary catalyst for transmutation. Breathe deeply and accept that your task is not to build, but to demolish what you thought you were. The mechanics of the transfer of power lie not in an act of faith, but in an act of absolute and vigilant surrender. The soul is not destroyed. It dissolves through starvation, by withdrawing energy from constant identification with form, drama, and personal history. Enlightenment, the final synthesis, is the piercing and glorious realization that you were never the vessel, but the ocean of consciousness briefly contained within it. The discipline of dismantling is the permanent recognition that every reactive emotion, every neurotic attachment, and every intellectual defense are the last gasps of the soul's authority. The spirit must not take control, for it has always held it. The soul must simply cease its illusion of resistance. In this cessation, distinction disappears and the one self emerges. Now that this truth has been instilled in your inner being, I ask you, after confronting the soul's usurping role, what is the last vestige of identity that you find impossible to let go of? Is it your deepest pain, your most visible success, your self-imposed social role, or your narrative of justified victimhood? Name it. Leave your answer in the comments. By identifying and naming your strongest chain, you begin the inevitable process of liberation. Revealed knowledge should be a map, not a personal possession. If this truth resonated like the bell of your awakening, you now have an inescapable cosmic duty. Share this video with that seeker you know who is groping in the dark. Subscribe your being to this temple of gnosis, and activate the sacred notifications to ensure your permanent connection with the source of expansion. We have opened this portal, but the ascension is ongoing. A new corridor has manifested to deepen the practice of dismantling. The next video, waiting for you right here, is The Esoteric Sacrifice: How to Die to be Reborn. Don't let the inertia of your soul hold you back. Click now. Delaying risks, closing the vibrational portal. Eternity awaits you.